Morning and Chodesh Tov. Good Chodesh. We're holding a middle doubt that Shulchan Aruch, chapter 472, Tough Iron Base. Halacha 13, Gimel. We continue to daven for the welfare of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, our fellow learning mates as well.
Let's just make our dear
our classmates. Avram David ben Nussin HaKoyen. Av Nussin, no. Avram ben Nussin HaKoyen? Oh, yeah, I think that's what it is. Okay, we're halacha 13. Let's learn the halacha and then we'll back up as a little bit of a reminder, recap. So the halacha told us various different people who are required to sit, to recline, and those who are exempt, and those who shall not. So in a concluding statement, it says the halacha like this, in 13. Kol mi shepater meheseba, anyone who's exempt from reclining, umesiv and decides to recline, to be stringent. This is considered they translated it as commoner, but it's considered a simpleton. Meaning, there are times when you're not exempt to do something, and you do it anyway. It's a demonstration of your stringency. Your stringency. Although you're not obligated, you're doing it anyway. You're being more stringent upon yourself. Good for you. But in this instance, says the halacha, no. Presumably the rationale is, if you're exempt from reclining and you choose to recline, there's a certain arrogance to it. Because the idea of reclining is to demonstrate your freedom and your self-expression. So being stringent to take upon self-expression that you're not supposed to has a level of arrogance to it. When what you're taking upon yourself is to be more restrictive of oneself or to push yourself a little bit more, praiseworthy. You're exempt from doing something, but you do it anyway. So you're pushing the limits of your service of Hashem, or you're taking on more discipline. You're not doing something, even though you may have a permissibility to do so. Good for you, praiseworthy. But there are times, although the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say this here directly, but there are times when taking on stringency has an element of arrogance to it. The Gemara will use the language mechzi ki yuhara. It seems like you're showing off. Now, though the Gemara doesn't use that language here, it would seem that the similar thing applies. If you're not obligated reclining, and you do so, excuse me, it demonstrates a certain level of arrogance. Mm-hmm. That's perhaps what's happening here. The footnotes don't give any insight if you're into this idea. Just gives the source and contrast. So, using this halacha, let's go backwards and see a little recap of who are the people who are exempt. So, servants, waiters are obligated to recline. If you're a student in the presence of your teacher who teaches you a craft, you are obligated to recline. If you're sitting at the same table as the Rebbe, as a great scholar of the generation, although you didn't learn anything from him, but he's the leader of the generation, he's the great scholar, then you're not allowed to recline. Not you don't have to, you're not allowed to. You should not.
It's not an exemption, it's a prohibition.
It's inappropriate beyond just the language is aimly. You should not. If you're in front of your ultimate teacher, he's not the leader of the generation, but he's your ultimate teacher who you learn most of your Torah from. Not appropriate to recline unless your teacher gave you permission. Right? So far, none of these people are in the category of people who are exempt from reclining and shouldn't. If they do, it's not praiseworthy. It's considered common or it's considered simpleton.
So
the only one
we haven't found that.
We haven't found that yet. Going backwards, it's either you shouldn't or you should. So far what we have for the one who doesn't have to is women. Women don't have to. That's the only example here. Women don't have to.
That wouldn't apply to it, but then when you're saying this would.
So that's the funny thing. This whole halacha yigimel only applies to women, seemingly, but unless I'm missing something else.
But women is debate also.
Right? They're taking one view, but the end is that
it's a question. Over years, it's not.
Exactly.
I don't even know if they apply.
That's what I was alluding to when I mentioned this last time. That's going to be halacha that I want to unpack. This is what I'm talking about. Because you go backwards, you don't really see anybody that's exempt outright, and would be a commoner if they did. A student in front of the teacher either shouldn't or should, unless the example is if the teacher gives permission to a student to recline. Does the student have to recline in that instance? Right? Because look at the phrasing of the Shulchan Aruch in Halacha 11. No, it's a sha'az chayiv. Sorry. If his teacher gave him permission, then he's chayiv, then he's obligated. If his teacher gives him permission, he's obligated. Right? So the only case here is women. But as you correctly point out, when we learned, women reclining are actually following an opinion that today reclining isn't the thing anymore.
To demonstrate your freedom.
Right? Unless it's talking about in the old day, when reclining was a demonstration of your freedom. But they're exempt. Right? And according to one opinion, reclining still is a method of freedom. And yet they're exempt. Although not necessarily are they exempt, because the halacha ruled that today all women are considered women of status, which would make them obligated, right? So who exactly are these people that the Shulchan Aruch is saying that if you're exempt, if you do so, it's considered simplicity.
Also, it's very presumptuous to conclude that it would be women here because
which other category?
It would have been highlighted.
Right.
Here, and it's not.
It's not.
So
it says anyone who's exempt.
There's this other situation where there's people who are actually exempt.
So who are they?
Right, but who are they?
Who are they? Unless, see, let's put it this way. The source of this is the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, right? That's the source of this, as we see in footnote 15. Now, that would mean that we're talking Jerusalem Talmud times when it was the manner of freedom to recline. And yet women were exempt. Right? That would be someone who shouldn't.
Or maybe it's talking about, I don't know, this could be a stretch. Maybe it's talking about not just reclining per se, but reclining in places where you don't normally recline at the seat.
Well,
I don't know.
Okay, we're going to get that in a second.
I'm thinking.
Okay, so then it would say, call makom shepatim meseba, any place or any time. Here it says call me, anyone.
Not really focused.
I thought of that. And actually, when you're supposed to recline is coming up next. And we're going to see how the halacha treats times when you aren't obligated.
Oh, well, that's interesting. It's coming next. Maybe that.
No, wouldn't make sense. Tell you whenever you're exempt. First of all, it would say whenever you're exempt, not anyone who's exempt,
100%.
right? And it would come after giving you when you should and when you, right?
Well, I don't place too much emphasis on the order.
Yeah, we have
already had indications where order didn't seem to be.
No, well, actually, the fact that the order didn't seem to us to be correct is further indication that requires further study, not to discard the matter of order,
Well,
right? It would mean not the other way around. Yeah, no, the order is definitely it definitely has to fit, especially since he keeps on saying, as we'll explain or as has been explained, the order is definitely a thing. Anyway, so the only suggestion I have maybe. So again, the source of this is the Yerushalmi, Jerusalem Talmud. They would have been talking about when reclining was a thing and when we're exempt, right? Now, the fact that the Shulchan Aruch brings it now again, post the time when the status has changed, the time has changed, and women's position are not because they're exempt, but because they're taking the view that reclining isn't the thing anymore, right? And the fact that we're putting it now in means that after all is said and done, even though it's true that women's current state is because they're relying on an opinion which says that it's not considered a thing anymore, but that is one opinion. And the other opinion says it is a thing, and they're going on exemption.
So then you can't apply that to them because it could be interpreted either way.
Right.
Therefore,
which means
they wouldn't be considered commoners.
Right, which means maybe the Shulchan Aruch is saying, because women are in the exemption category, a woman shouldn't say, I'm going to be stringent and take the view that says reclining is still a thing. Don't do that. You're on the woman learned the halacha now. So now she discovers that women are taking a view. And the view is that today reclining is not a thing. So she'll say to herself, oh, that's a lenient view. The stricter view would say it is a thing. And because I'm a woman of repute, as the halacha said, everyone's considered a prestigious woman nowadays. I'm going to take the stringent view and recline. So says the Alter Rebbe, don't take the stringent view. That's not considered praiseworthy. Maybe that's what he means. Because, in other words,
no, I understand your point.
Maybe. Taking into consideration that nowadays there's two views, and the woman taking one, and if she took the other view, she would recline. Says the Shulchan Aruch, don't start jumping views now because you're being more stringent. That's not the correct view. Maybe. Perhaps.
Does the Shulchan Aruch shed light on this point?
No. I see the footnotes that there are some more modern.
Usually the Alter Rebbe will cite from.
If you look in footnote, if you look in the Hebrew footnote, it tells you which super commentary to the Shulchan Aruch this comes from, the Taz and the Magen Avraham, and then it's based in the Jerusalem Talmud. And then, and then I see the footnote continues to look up more modern commentaries. And I'm guessing the more modern commentaries discuss this. Yag Torah, Shari Sholem.
I'm very interested.
Okay, so we'll have a look at one later today and see what we come up with. Okay, let's continue. Halacha Yudalet. Now we get to at which point in the Seder is it required to recline. So we already have a prelude to this because we learned already. I told you about the Rebbe's insight here in that there are two components to the reclining. One is it's a generalistic mitzvah for the entire night, as we saw from the Shulchan Aruch. It's an outgrowth of your obligation to demonstrate your freedom, recline, which would mean do it always. On the other hand, there are certain mitzvahs that require you to recline because they are freedom mitzvahs. So it's like two things going at once. A generalistic recline to demonstrate your freedom, and then a specific outgrowth of the specific mitzvahs when you're supposed to recline. Yeah, that's what we're about to discuss. This duality.
I think that's the case of the cigarette.
Yeah? Yeah. That's right. That's what we're gonna get. That's right. That's what we're gonna get to. So, although we learned in the Siddur, in the Rebbe's commentary to the Haggadah, we learned that the Chabad custom is not to recline at any other time, but the time of but the times that we're actually required to do so. So let's go to that, and we'll see the Rebbe's commentary there. Yudalet. In Moshe Tzarech La'aseh, when is one required to recline? The Shas Achilas Kazayis, when you eat the olive-sized portion, right? The basic required portion, Shemavarach Alav Alachilas Matzah, on which you make the blessing, demonstrating that you are now currently fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah, what we would call step number, whatever it is, number 10, 8, motzi matzah, right? Magid rachza, you wash your hands, motzi matzah. You make bracha motzi, and then you make matzah. You make the bracha, thank you Hashem for the mitzvah of matzah. That is the moment you're fulfilling your obligation to eat matzah that night, and that is when you'll lean. Number one. Number two, the time when you eat matzah and maror together, the sandwich, as opposed to when you eat the sandwich itself. Because now
the sandwich itself?
Besides, as opposed to when you eat the motor on its own. When you eat the sandwich, you put it together. You do recline. And presumably, the reason is because in Hillel's view, that's when you're fulfilling the mitzvah of eating the matzah. When you eat it together with your motor and your Pesach offering, as you would have done in the temple times. Likewise, when you eat the afikoman being the matzah at the end of the meal, this matzah is to remember the Pesach offering, which would have been eaten at the end of the meal. And when you recline then too, it's again a freedom food. Now, you could have been eating much more matzah in between matzah at the beginning and the matzah at the end. You could be eating matzah throughout your meal, but no requirement to recline. So the three obligatory matzahs, basically, matzah, the first one, the biblical one, the koirach and the afikoman, the three matzah obligations that are listed on your Seder steps. And then, b'shas shtiyas daled kosis, at the time when you drink the 4 cups of wine. What's the reason? Because all these 4 things, 4 cups of wine and 3 matzah, they are in remembrance, in commemoration of our freedom and our redemption. So as he explains, Shadalat Kaisis, because the 4 cups of wine, as we're going to learn in the next section of the Gemara, Tiknu Chachamim, our sages enacted, Keneged Dal L'Shen Shal Geula. The 4 cups of wine are there corresponding to the 4 expressions of redemption mentioned in the Parsha of Eira. 4 different expressions where Hashem says, I redeem you, I will take you out, I redeem you, I will take you, I will save you. So wine is established by our sages to commemorate freedom. Good. So that's why, that's direct link to freedom. So we recline by the wine. Now the matzah is a little bit more difficult to understand how it's, sorry?
Attenuated?
Yes, why? Why? Why would matzah be more of a problem? Matzah is called poor man's bread. It's actually poor man's bread. But when did they eat matzah? While leaving. Okay? So that one's easy. The first matzah, which is the obligation to eat matzah because they rushed out, that's related to freedom. The other matzah continues, the afikoman at the end of the Seder, and the sandwich at the beginning of the meal. So the afikoman at the end of the meal, and the sandwich at the beginning of the meal, him zeichel Pesach, their commemoration of the Pesach offering. Right? The sandwich is the way Hillel would have done the Pesach offering. He would have had a Pesach offering with his maror, with his lettuce, with his matzah all together.
And a piece of
the Pesach offering. Right? Pesach offering, maror and matzah.
Yeah.
So we eat that to remember that. And then we eat the matzah at the end of the Seder, at the end of the meal, to remember the carbon Pesach, the Pesach offering, which they would have eaten at the end of the meal. So because the sandwich and the afikoman are remembering of the Pesach offering, and the Pesach offering would have been eaten in a manner of freedom. And therefore, they too, the sandwich and the afikoman, require reclining to demonstrate a freedom. Now to your point, and this we're going to look at the Rebbe's commentary tomorrow on this. But the rest of the meal, the rest of anything you eat, if you want to eat without reclining, you're welcome to. And we don't have the authority to require that he recline. Not exactly. Because as we said before, the reclining is an outbreath of your demonstration of freedom. And because of that, you're supposed to set your table beautifully. So we could say the more the merrier, recline. But we don't have it in us to say you have to recline now. Because the have to recline is limited to the moments that actually express freedom. So that's the fine language. It's not in our hands to require you to recline. Right?
It's voluntary reclining.
That's right. And therefore, the one who decides to recline throughout his entire meal, praiseworthy. As opposed to, there you go. As opposed to one who's not, as opposed to one who's exempt from reclining, but does recline. Simpleton, commoner, missing the point. But if you are obligated to recline and you choose to recline at times and you're not required to, praiseworthy. And he's doing now the more prestigious version of the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is an outbirth of demonstrate your freedom, which is why your table is set beautifully. So good, recline as much as you love. Hence, the cigarette reclining. Let's look at footnote 61.
That would be a praiseworthy example.
Exactly, yep. Let's look at 61. Footnote 61. And tomorrow we're going to look at the source that he's citing to in 61.
In 61 or?
Footnote 61, yeah. We're going to look at the sources tomorrow. Yeah, I mentioned the Rebbe's Haggadah. It is, however, the Lubavitch custom not to recline during the remainder of the meal. Haggadah in Mukutei Taimim Munhagim. That's the Rebbe's Haggadah. Nor we eating the karpas. Sefer Munhagim, the book of Munhagim. We're going to talk about that more tomorrow, looking at the Rebbe's comment on the Seder. Continuing, the Rebbe's praise of one who reclines during the entire meal appears to support the argument that reclining in general is an obligation that is not specifically tied to the mitzvahs of eating matzah or drinking the 4 cups of wine, but rather a general mitzvah. Now he cites to that, look at the Sikha. There was commentary where he explains that there's 2 components to the mitzvah of reclining. One is an outbirth of the mitzvahs of matzah and wine, and one is a general mitzvah, recline, to demonstrate freedom. This praiseworthy factor demonstrates that it's a mitzvah of general and that night. Demonstrate your freedom. So whenever you can, go do it. Unless you are an exemption. Not it is an exemption.
No, of course.
Unless you are an exemption.
Exempt from those points where you're obligated to recline.
Yes, that's correct.
Not
unless you are one who's exempt, period. Exactly.
Not a pure
exemption. Exactly. So it's an exemption that comes out of what? Out of who you are or what the circumstance is. That's why the footnote, that's why the halacha 13 says, anyone who's an exempt, not any time you're exempt. Anyone who's exempt, on the person who's exempt completely, which, as we suggested, is pretty much only women. And again, understanding what that means exactly. Okay, so God willing, tomorrow we're going to look at the Rebbe's commentary on the Haggadah about this. And then we'll continue with the Shulchan Aruch, where it discusses what happens if someone fails to recline. What should they do? And once we've done that, we're then going to go to selections of the Rebbe's Sikha, the Rebbe's talk, which I keep on referencing. The Rebbe talks about how reclining has 2 components, and what's the difference which component you have, what were the practical applications to these 2 different views. And how that ever concludes, and why that ever concludes, that there are both of these components. It's a general mitzvah for the whole night, as well as an outbirth of specific mitzvahs. Okay, wonderful day, Eden. Good Chodesh, and may we see indeed miracles to now today. Very,
month of miracles.
Yeah. Yep.